Hi, Dr. P here, and I'm going to try to answer the question, how should a competitive game end? And should is in quotation marks because it depends in part on the preferences of the audience. Some audiences might prefer different kinds of endings than I prefer. Anyway, I'll talk about it as best I can. So I'm asking, how would designers like their game to end? The emotions, I suppose you'd say. I'm talking primarily about opposed games, competitive games for at least two sides, where the sides interact with each other. But much of this can apply to other kinds of games. So the basic question is, do you want the game to end with a bang or a whimper? Now in a novel, the author controls this, but a game designer cannot control it or should not control it, except in a one-player game. The most skilled or luckiest should win depending on the game. That's my point of view. If there's considerable disparity in skill or luck, then shouldn't the game be pretty one-sided and end in a stomp? I remember J.C. Lawrence saying years ago that the outcome of Euro games was often settled halfway through a session, but players didn't recognize it or realize it. And I've certainly seen this in multi-sided, that is more than two players, war games, that especially players who are not so experienced in that kind of game don't see far enough ahead. And I can remember playtesting games where one guy had essentially won the game, and he and I knew it and looked at each other, but the rest of the players didn't realize it. So that's another element of this, how should the game end? Sometimes poor play makes a difference. Now, many people like the end of a game to be tense, but one person's tension is another person's frustration. And frustration is something you don't particularly want in games to a great extent unless the players are expecting it. Tension may make it more memorable than a stomp will be memorable, but on the other hand, I don't want to cheat a player who's clearly better or far luckier than other players. What are the effects of skill? Well, players of equal skill and luck, shouldn't the outcome be really close? But if there's a big disparity in skill or in luck, won't that lead to a whimper ending in effect? Skill may be counterbalanced by luck and vice versa. If those are equally important in the game, then they counterbalance. But if there's an extreme disparity in either, for example, a game that's mostly about skill and not luck, then the player who is most skillful has a considerable advantage. But views about game balance vary. Some players want superior skill to end in an overwhelming win, a stomp. They want to, quote, crush my enemies, see them driven before me, unquote. I'm quoting Conan the Barbarian. What is good in life, Conan? Crush my enemies can have a very one-sided, lopsided ending, no tension at all. On the other hand, some players like a delicate balance where the game result is decided in the last turn of the last sequence, the game ending in a bang. Tension is inevitably part of that sort of game ending. Sometimes the designer can set up conditions that make a bang at the end more likely. For example, in my historical game Britannia, I ended with the several invasions of Britain that resulted in the Norman conquest. We hear about the Norman conquest, but there were other invasions as well. Now, video games are somewhat different. Video games can be programmed to respond on the fly to what's happening. If the players or player are doing well, the game can ramp up the difficulty. If they're doing poorly, the game can reduce the difficulty. A game like Left 4 Dead did this particularly well, and that was a 4-player cooperative game of fighting and mostly escaping from zombies. So if players are of equal skill or luck, the game ought to come down to a tense end. But if a player is significantly more skilled or luckier than the others, then the game might end with a whimper. And I don't think it's possible to entirely avoid the occasion that a game will end with a whimper, even if most of the time it ends with a bang. Now I want to take a couple examples from Britannia. Britannia is a 4 to 5 hour game, and it's very competitive. And yet, at the end, during that Norman conquest phase, one battle can settle who wins. It's not something that happens all the time, but it's not unusual. And toward the end of the game, everybody is figuring out the points and figuring out what they can do, and they have lots of options, so it makes it a tense ending. Yet you can also get situations like a player does very poorly early in the game, and players then kind of ignore him or her and lay off. And that player comes back to win or nearly win because the players aren't paying attention. Both of those work pretty well as endings to a game. When I design a game, I try to balance my duty to the players with skills, feeling they should do better, with my desire for a tense ending to the game. But your mileage may vary. Thanks for listening.